So what is it we're going to create? Well, let's go back over to Blender. And what we're going to do is try and create an apartment scene. Let me go over to the Finder window here, and I have in here some reference images. And what I'd like to do is create an apartment scene that's kind of a rundown apartment in a not so great part of town. And I've found these images out on Google Images just to give me kind of an idea of a sense of it. I don't know that I want it to be this run down, and I don't know that I want it to be an art gallery per se, but I like these windows here. I like the layout of this with kind of the main door coming in here and the kitchen and then a living area and maybe a door over here and a door over here, and it looks like there are windows over here. I kind of like the layout of this one. And then this is just a collection of junk and dirty dishes in the sink and maybe some cracked walls and things like this and maybe an old radiator and things like that. So I've just gathered these images together to give me a sense of what I'm trying to create. And I would really recommend this with any project that you do. If you're going for realism, then you really need reference images. Whether you find them on the internet through Google Images or whatever, whether you go out and take your own pictures, I really feel like you need to surround yourself with the imagery that you're trying to create. Even if you're trying to create a non-realistic scene, then I would suggest maybe trying to find images from a particular art movement. Maybe you want to look at painters of the Impressionist period or Surrealism, or maybe you're thinking about the chiaroscuro lighting of the Dutch masters. Maybe you're thinking of like Caravaggio and Rembrandt or whatever. Find as many reference images as you can, so that you're grounding your work in reality. Even if it's other people's artwork, you're still grounding the work in reality. Anyway, I think that reference images are really important, and every artist that you love and admire uses reference images, I guarantee. Now, I'd also like an object in my scene in Blender that gives me a sense of scale of how big a person is. So I'm going to come back here into Blender, and what I'd like to do is just create a cube. I'll come over here to the Create tab and I'll click on Cube, and for this I want this to be 6 feet tall. So I'm currently using meters, and that's really what I'm going to use mainly, but for me I know as I said, feet and inches. So I'm thinking of just a kind of an average male being 6 feet tall. That just seems like a size that would be a good scale for my scene here. So I'm going to come over here to the scene panel, and just briefly, I'm going to switch it over to Imperial. And remember I said that when you change from one measure of unit to another, the size of the objects doesn't change. It's the size of the measurement that changes. So these are still the right size. Notice here that now it's 6.5 feet tall. So if I came over here to this field right here and just typed 6 in here and enter, now this object is 6 feet tall. So I also can change the X and the Y. I'll just change these to 1 each. There we go. So now we've got a reference object that is exactly 6 feet tall. And if I switch back to the metric system of measure here, you can see that the Z is actually 1.829 meters. So it's doing the conversion for us, which is kind of nice. So now what I want to do is make sure that this is flat on the ground plane and that the pivot point is at the ground plane as well. I want to make sure that when I zero it out in the Z-axis that it's right on the ground. So I'm going to hit the period key on the numpad to frame this up, and let me tab into edit mode. I'll press Control Tab to bring up the mesh select, and I'll choose face, and I'll just select that one face. Now I want to move the 3D cursor to that, so I'll press Shift S, and I'll move the cursor to the selected right there. Now if I tab back into object mode, I can come over here to the Tools panel and set the origin to the 3D cursor. Now the origin of this object is right at the bottom of it. So if I take this Z-axis, the location here, and zero it out, that'll pop it right down to the floor. Oops, right down to the floor of my object there, or my scene. So now that we have that, let me get this cursor back in the center as well. So I'll press Shift S and put the cursor in the center of the grid. All right, so there we have our person height and the floor of our scene. Now I'm going to take this object, this scale object, and move it to another layer. So I'll just select it and press the M key, and I'll move it to the last layer down here so you can see it right there. And I've got the floor over here in the first layer. Maybe I'll take this and I'll move it down to this layer right down here. There we go. So now as I create new objects, I can always come down here and press Shift and click that layer and bring the floor back. Well, let's go ahead and begin blocking the walls out for our scene. Let me come back here. Let me name this guy. I better give him a name. What do we want to call that? I'll just call it 6 feet scale. So I know that that's the 6 foot tall scale there. And I think I'd like to just begin blocking out the walls. So I'll bring back the floor as well. I'll create a cube, and let's begin moving it over here. So I'll just bring it up a bit. I'll scale it in the X, so I'll press S and X and scale it so it's a little bit thinner. And I'll begin scaling these kind of like this. And I'll also maybe tab into edit mode, grab this face and start bringing it up a bit like this. Now I'll hit the N key so I can kind of see what the dimensions are of this. So in the Z axis I've got 4 meters. If I switch over to imperial, I've got 13 feet. So to me, I think an 8 or 10 foot ceiling would be wise. Let's go with 9 actually. So let me grab this and move it down a bit, and I'll scale it in the Z until we get around 9 feet here. Let's try that. That may be a little bit tall, but let's try it. So I'll bring that down so it kind of sits on the ground. Once again, I'll move this cursor. I can tab into edit mode, select that bottom face, press Shift S, move the cursor to the selected, and then move that pivot point under the Tools tab, set the origin to the 3D cursor. And then if I drop that down to 0, now it's going to sit right on that ground plane there. All right, so the apartment reference image that I want to use for this, and as I mentioned, I kind of like this layout. So we've got this wall here, and then a wall sticking out, counters here, and I'm thinking there are windows over here. You can kind of see the light coming in here. So I want to try and replicate this layout. So if that's going to be my layout, then let's say here's that wall, that back wall that we were just looking at. It's currently 50 feet. I don't think that place is that big. Let's bring that y-axis down. I'm going to press S and Y, reduce that a bit. And let's go ahead and take this and duplicate it. And I'm going to press Shift D and enter, and then I'm going to move this around and maybe bring it over here for this wall coming over in the kitchen where that I think the front door would be. So if I press R and Z, I can rotate around this axis. And if I look over here in the Z axis under rotation, I can see I've turned it 78 degrees. I'll just type in 90 and bring that over here. Something like this. That feels a little too big to me. So I feel like this wouldn't be 40 feet long. So I'm going to try and bring that in to maybe 30 feet or so. And let me center that cursor again. Let me bring this wall in. So this is going to be the wall where the front door is. And if I grab this face now and bring it in, yeah, let's call it something like that. So now this one is 30 feet long as well. Yeah, so maybe we're just dealing with a 30-foot square room here. 30 feet by 30 feet. So I'm just trying to lay this out now. And let me grab this and duplicate it, hit the X key, and move that over there. And then I'll just grab this, Shift D, Y, and then drag that over here. So let's take a look at this, see if this kind of feels right. Now, one thing that we can do here, just like we can move around in Unity with the WASD keys and the mouse, you can also do that here in Blender. So if I press Shift F and then hit the Tab key, that'll drop me down to the ground, and I can move around with the mouse and then press the W key and just move around the scene. So I'm kind of, see, here's how tall I am with this guy. So I'm about 6 feet tall, or at least maybe almost 6 feet tall here. And so this gives me a sense of the room. So I can kind of move around here and say, okay, if I came in the front door, I'd walk in here and see the kitchen. Okay, I move in here and see the living area. Maybe there'd be windows over here. All right, this is feeling pretty good. So I'm going to hit the Escape key, and there we go. So now I think that's going to work pretty well. Let me go back to that reference image and see what I think here. If this is 10 feet here, and I'm thinking this is 20 feet, then maybe, yeah, then maybe this is about 30 by 30 all the way around. All right, well, let's give that a try. So I'll call this wall front door, wall window, wall doors, and I'll call this wall back, something like that. So let's name these now. This one I'll call, as I said, wall back. This one will be wall front door. This one over here I'll call wall windows, because we're going to put a couple of windows in here. This one over here will be called wall doors, because we'll have maybe a door to a bedroom and maybe a door to a bathroom or something like that. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and select this one. I'm going to hide it away because I want to be able to see into this room fairly easily. So this is wall windows. I'm just going to click on the eye icon and turn that off so I can see in here a little easier. So once again, I'll press Shift F and then the Tab key, and that will put me on the ground, and I can move around with WASD and try and get a sense of how this is going to feel. Yeah, I think this is pretty good. We'll go with this for now and see if we need to alter it as we go. All right, so we've got a good beginning here. We've established a pipeline from Blender to Unity. We've established our units of measure right over here. I'm going to switch back to metric now. We've created a scale object here, and we've got some basic walls and floor in to begin our scene. Now we should do one more thing before we close out of here. I'm going to go back to Unity, and I've begun creating in the Assets folder a collection of folders to organize my project. One of the things I want to do is create a new folder here by right-clicking, choosing Create and Folder, and I want to just call this Scenes. Here we go. And in this, I'm going to put all of my scenes. So this scene right here, I'm going to just call Scene Test 1, something like that. So I'm just going to come up here to the File menu. Now you can't see that right now, but I'm just going to come up to File and Save Scene. I can also just choose Control or Command S right in here, and that will bring up the Save Scene window. I'm going to click this and go into Scenes, and then I'll just call this Scene Test 01. So I'm just going to be creating a collection of test scenes as I go. So I'll click Save, and there we go. So there's our scene inside the Scenes folder. So as we go, we're going to do more and more of this organizing, and we're also going to do a good deal of organizing up here in the hierarchy as well. One of the things that's great about Unity is it's very open to however you want to do things, however you want to organize things, which also means that it can get to be a complete mess too. So with these larger projects where we're creating a lot of objects within a scene, it's really good to begin organizing your scene right up front. All right, so if we go back to Blender, we can see that we've already got a floor, a couple of walls. We've got our scale object, our 6 feet scale. We're ready to go ahead and begin creating our object. I think what I'm going to do, instead of blocking out doors and walls and kitchen cabinets and things right now, I think what I'm going to do is actually create a piece of furniture, because I think, in my head at least, I can get a pretty good sense of how big a piece of furniture should be compared to this 6 foot tall scale object. So once I get that in there and can move it around and put it against a wall or move it around here, I can get a sense as to whether or not the space is correct, how it feels. So I think in the next video, that's what we'll do.